1965. Chevrolet sold more than 1 million of them in a single year. In the history of the American automobile, only a handful of cars have ever hit that number. 55 years later, on a cold February morning in Detroit, General Motors quietly killed it. No press event, no parade, just a short speech, a signature on a trunk lid, and the last one rolled off the line. Here is the part that never quite fit. It did not die because it was bad. The final Chevrolet Impala was, by nearly every professional review, one of the finest full-size sedans on the American market. It died anyway. So why? Why does one of the most successful cars in the history of Detroit end up quietly retired, replaced by nothing at all? The answer is one of the strangest stories in the American automobile industry. And it begins 62 years earlier with a name that Chevrolet's own executives thought was ridiculous. 1958. General Motors is celebrating its 50th anniversary. Chevrolet's answer is a top trim level attached to the Bel Air, given the name of a fast African antelope. The Impala. According to Claire McKishan, head of Chevrolet styling at the time, one senior executive laughed the first time the name came up. Why, he asked, would they name a car after some goat? Someone corrected him. An Impala was not a goat. It was elegant, fast, and African. Good thing the correction stuck, because Chevrolet Goat would have been a hard badge to sell. That first Impala arrived quietly innovative. A brand new X-frame chassis, 3 round tail lamps on each side, a signature Chevrolet would carry for the next 40 years. Under the hood, a big block 348 V8, producing up to 280 horsepower. Only 2 body styles were offered. A hardtop coupe, a convertible. That was it. For 12 months, the Impala lived in the shadow of the Bel Air. Then Chevrolet did something bold. They set it free. The moment the Impala stood on its own, in 1959, everything shifted. 473,000 units sold in that first independent year. By the mid-60s, the Impala was the single best-selling automobile in the United States. Not the best-selling Chevrolet. The best-selling car in the country, period. Ford could not touch it. Pontiac could not touch it. And then came 1965. Chevrolet sold more than 1 million Impalas in a single model year. Very few cars in the history of the automobile have ever reached that number. The Impala was not just a car. It was the shape of American life. The yellow taxi in New York. The highway patrol cruiser in your rear-view mirror. The sedan your father drove to the factory. Families packed the trunk for their first cross-country road trip in one. Teenagers learned to drive in one. Newborns came home from the hospital in the back seat of one. For a decade, if you closed your eyes and pictured the American family car, you were picturing an Impala. Nothing suggested that would ever change. And then, almost overnight, everything did. October 1973. The oil-producing nations of the Middle East cut off exports to the United States. Within weeks, gas lines wrapped around city blocks in every corner of the country. Overnight, a big American sedan with a V8 and 12 miles per gallon stopped being a symbol of prosperity. It became a mortgage payment at the gas pump. 2 years later, Washington passed the corporate average fuel economy standard known as CAFE, forcing every automaker to raise the efficiency of the cars they sold. Big American sedans were exactly the wrong shape for those rules. And at the same moment, something arrived from across the Pacific that Detroit had underestimated for years. Small, efficient Japanese cars. The Toyota Corolla, the Honda Civic, the Datsun. Cheap, reliable, and easy on fuel. Americans, once fiercely loyal to their domestic brands, began quietly switching sides. Chevrolet fought back the only way it knew how. They shrank the Impala. They pulled cylinders out of it. They wrapped it in more plastic and less chrome. By the mid-80s, the fight was lost. In 1985, the Impala nameplate was retired entirely. For the first time in almost 30 years, there was no Impala on any Chevrolet dealer lot in America. You would think that was the end of the story. It was not. Chevrolet had one more chance to save the sedan, and when they took it, they built one of the boldest Impalas ever. 1994. A designer inside General Motors named John Moss unveiled a bold concept. Take the big rear-wheel drive Caprice, the platform that had served American police departments for years. Drop in the LT1 V8 from the Corvette. Add blacked-out trim, sport wheels, and revive the badge that had defined the Impala's greatest era. Super Sport. The result was 260 horsepower and a road presence no other American sedan could match. For 3 model years, the Impala Super Sport was one of the coolest cars on the American road. Police officers loved it. Tuners loved it. A rising generation of hip-hop artists made it a cultural icon. And then, in 1996, Chevrolet killed it themselves. The Impala returned in the year 2000 as a front-wheel drive family sedan. Reliable, comfortable, popular with rental fleets. But it was not the Impala anyone remembered. And by that point, something far larger than any Japanese or European rival was quietly killing the American sedan altogether. Americans were no longer buying sedans. They were buying trucks with a back seat. The Chevrolet Tahoe, the Chevrolet Suburban, the Ford Explorer, the Toyota Highlander, the Honda Pilot. Higher seating, more cargo, room for children, dogs, and everything a family carried. And for the executives inside Detroit, far higher profit margins per unit sold. An Explorer or a Tahoe generated 2 to 3 times the profit of a comparable sedan. The Impala was not losing to a Toyota Camry. It was losing to a Ford Explorer, and no amount of engineering could reverse that math. Chevrolet made one last serious attempt. The 10th generation Impala, launched in 2014, was, in the honest opinion of most reviewers, a genuinely excellent car. Sharp lines, a quiet cabin, a 3.6-litre V6 delivering smooth performance. Consumer Reports ranked it the best full-size sedan sold in America. It was arguably the finest Impala since the muscle car era. It did not matter. Buyers walked right past it in showrooms and put deposits on Traverses and Silverados instead. Sales fell every year without exception. The last full year of production sold fewer than 50,000 units. Compare that to the millions sold in 1965, and the trajectory of the American sedan tells the story on its own. In 2018, General Motors made the announcement. They were discontinuing almost every passenger car in their lineup. The Impala, the Malibu, the Cruise, the Sonic, the Volt, all of them at once. The Detroit Hamtramck plant, home of the Impala for years, would be retooled to build electric trucks and utility vehicles instead. The final Impala rolled off the line in February of 2020. Painted blue. No press event. Just a short speech from a plant manager and a worker's signature on the trunk lid. 62 years. 10 generations. More than 16 million units sold. Over. Drive down any American road today and count the sedans you pass. Then count the trucks and utility vehicles. That imbalance did not appear by accident. It is the shape of a decision Detroit made, 1 quarter at a time for 2 decades. The Impala was the family car of the American middle class. It carried a generation to their graduations, their weddings, their Sunday services, and eventually to their funerals. When your grandfather spoke of his first car, chances are he was speaking of an Impala. When it disappeared, something larger than a nameplate disappeared with it. Perhaps this is progress. Perhaps the utility vehicle really is the car that fits how Americans live now. Or perhaps the people who build the cars quietly stopped believing the people who buy them wanted anything else. So here is the question worth leaving you with tonight. Did the Impala die because America stopped wanting it? Or did America stop wanting it because Detroit stopped building it as if they meant it? Share your answer in the comments below. And if the story of the American automobile means something to you, subscribe. Because a great many American legends have been quietly retired, and every one of them deserves to be remembered.